How did I finish with my November budget? It's time to put a bow on it coming up next. Welcome back to Ready Budget Go. My name is Drew, and on this channel we talk about cash budgeting, saving money, and achieving our financial goals. If that sounds like something you're interested in, please consider subscribing, hitting the like button, and leaving a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. Today what I'm going to be doing is working on the last week of November, which for me started on November 29th. So I go by Fridays, and when there's 5 Fridays in a month, most of the last week is going to spill over into the following week. And that's okay. I mean, the line has to go somewhere. But even though most of this week was in December, I'm still counting it as November as far as weekly expenses go. So right now what I'm doing is I'm filling in all of the expenses that I had for that last week. And these are things that I put onto a credit card or just didn't pay cash for. Every week I give myself a $200 allowance. I take $100 out of the bank, and I also leave $100 essentially in the bank to repay credit cards for anything that I charge. Now, sometimes I go over in cash, and then I have to use a credit card for things that I otherwise would have paid cash for. And other times, most of the time, I don't spend all the cash, but I use my card more than the $100 that I have in the bank. So the cash doesn't go back in the bank necessarily, but I take out less for the following week. It all works out in the end. So I didn't have all that many expenses this week, just because, well, on Thanksgiving, I went and had Friendsgiving with some friends of mine that I've known for, going on 20 years. And they gave me a ton of leftovers, so I didn't go to the supermarket, and I didn't really have to spend all that much money on food like at restaurants or going out or picking up last-minute groceries or anything like that. I was just really eating the leftovers for days, and I got kind of sick of them, but at the same time, it was nice not to have to make those purchases so that I could put that money towards something else. So now what I'm doing is I'm totaling up all of the money that I spent on this page, just because I want to see how much I spent out of pocket over the course of the whole month. There's another page that has most of the first 4 weeks of expenses on it, and I'll total that up later. But for now, I'm just going to get the total here and write in that figure at the bottom, which is about $380. So now what I'm going to do is I'm looking for a highlighter so that I can identify all of these expenses as being in that week. And I've picked this green highlighter, but that was a mistake. I had already picked Black Friday expenses to be highlighted in that color, and I forgot. Or I didn't realize that the color would dry to be the same as those Black Friday expenses. So now I've got Black Friday conflated with the last week, but that's not the end of the world because those Black Friday expenses were also in that last week. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to page 1, and I'm going to highlight these expenses from earlier in the month. These were gift expenses, and I wasn't quite sure where I was going to put them. I thought, well, they could just come out of my buffer or my remainder, but I thought, to heck with it, I'm just going to throw it into Black Friday. I know I'm going to be over for what I had planned to spend on Black Friday, but at this point, with the emergency that happened this month and just everything else that went on, I thought, you know what, I'm just going to call it. It'll go into the monthly budget regardless of which bucket I put it in, and it's all going to come out the same at the end with the final numbers. So now what I'm doing is, as I explained earlier, I'm totaling up everything from this page just to see where I got to with all of my expenses for the month. And this is going to be a little bit off just because toward the end of the month, the last couple of weeks, I'd been putting in my cash spending, not for what I spent per merchant, but just the total amount of cash that I spent each week. And I didn't do that throughout the whole month. So this is more of just kind of informational for me for this month. But I think once I get into December and I'm tracking that cash every week, it'll be far more reflective of what I've spent during the month. And then I can compare that against the monthly budget to make sure that those numbers match and add up with what I'm spending out of my wallet every week. So there's the total, almost $1,400 on this page. So adding in the $380 from the other page, we're up to almost 1,500. No, almost 1,800 bucks. Now, not all of that was wallet spend. As we go back to the monthly budget overview, you'll see that I had $200 budgeted per week for out-of-pocket expenses. So that's only $1,000. But also included in those expenses are my emergency that came up. We had a bomb cyclone that hit us, and I had to essentially evacuate my home because I didn't have power for 4 or 5 days. And also, it includes the Black Friday expenses, which I had put as a stockpile expense. Some people call them sinking funds. I've always called them stockpiles, so that's what I stick with. So it's got a lot kind of conflated in there together. So now what I'm doing is I'm adding up all of the amounts that I spent on a weekly basis to see how I did versus my budget of $1,000 for the month. And I was about $27 over. That's not too bad. But again, that doesn't include the excess spending on Black Friday and Christmas gifts, and it also doesn't include that emergency spend. If you watched my previous video, then you'll know that for the emergency spend, I ended up taking that out of my money that was supposed to go to my Roth IRA this month. So I essentially punted that into December. I took all of it back from my brokerage. I hadn't yet contributed to the IRA, but I had transferred it to my brokerage. I sent it back to my checking account, and I used that to pay off all of the emergency expenses. So now what I'm doing is I'm totaling up all of the money that I spent on gifts. And this is Black Friday expenses and other gifts. If I hadn't added in those other two from earlier in the month, I would have been below budget for the Black Friday spend by a few dollars. But because I added them in, it put me over. And like I say, that's okay. I ended up with a surplus at the end of the month, and it was more than what I had projected to have because, again, I took $900 out of what I had planned to send to retirement, and I didn't spend $900 on the emergency. But I thought I'm just going to bring it all back, and then I'll make the contribution in December. My goal is to have my Roth IRA fully funded before the end of the calendar year. You can make contributions up to April 15th of the following year, so before your taxes are due, but I would just rather have it all done by December 31st if I can. So now what I'm doing is I'm totaling up all of the expenses that I had, and I'm subtracting that from the income that I had to see what my remainder is. And so here it's almost $400. It was supposed to be about half of that, but again, with the emergency and everything else that went on this month, it just turned out to be quite a different picture than what I had initially anticipated. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip over to my month-end review page. I'm going to pull out the budget overview so that I can have it side by side and I can plug in these numbers in the month-end review. So I'm going to start with my income, what I had budgeted versus the actual. And the actual did come in higher, and I knew that it would. I deliberately sandbagged those numbers just to give myself a little bit of an extra buffer, just because this is my first month. I did it again for my December budget, but I think when I get to January, those numbers are going to be more on target, and I'm going to really try to hone in on making sure that I'm not leaving this sort of a slush fund and that I'm being more mindful and more careful with how much is coming in as well as how much is going out. So now I am adding in the amount that I spent on bills and calculating the difference there. There was a little bit of a variance because some bills came in lower than expected, and then I also didn't pay out of pocket for my prescriptions this month. Or I did, but I used a gift card that I had, so that money came back into the budget. Now, the wallet spend and the stockpile spend, those are shortfalls, so I will put brackets around those later to show that they are negative numbers, that I in fact overspent. And again, not too bad. It could have been a heck of a lot worse, but still, I need to show that I did go over budget, and I want to do better about that in future months and in future years. But I'm not going to beat myself up too much about it. Together, it was about $100, maybe $110. So it's not the end of the world, and my buffer from my income more than covered that. So that's the difference, the $222 between um, what I had planned to send to my Roth IRA, which is $900, and what the emergency cost me. So that was money that will roll into December, and I'll use that to fund my IRA in December, my Roth IRA in December. So now I'm just totaling those up, and I'm calculating the difference between what the plan was and what the actual was. So $287.14 is the final difference. Not anywhere near where I'd planned, but that's the reality of it. So I'm writing in myself a couple of notes here. One about overspending on Black Friday, and the other about the bomb cyclone emergency that came up that took my retirement funds, and that's where that money went. So now what I'm going to do is write my reflections about how the month went. And I think this is an important exercise to do because we tend to forget. We're so used to living in the moment and the constant stream of information that is coming at us every day that it's really healthy to look back on the month that was and how we did and what we are proud of ourselves for and what we wish we would have done differently. So in this case, my wallet spending was kind of all over the place. I managed to bring it back a little bit toward the end of the month, but even so, the first 3 weeks of the month, I went over by a fair amount. And the question that I have to ask myself is, do I want to change that going forward? And I'll talk about this more a little bit later, or do I want to try to buckle down harder? So that was one of the things that I remarked on. Overall, coming in close to target, but there were a few weeks where I was off. And unfortunately, being left-handed, I can't exactly see what I'm writing until I take my hand away. I did all of this a few hours ago, and I'm coming back now to do the voiceover. I decided that I was going to do it this way this week just because I felt like if I tried to do it while I was trying to write, I would quickly lose my train of thought. So I don't know if other folks are like that, but for me, that's what usually happens. So Christmas shopping finished early. That was great. Of course, I had to pull in some of the money that I'd budgeted in December to do that. I went over in my Black Friday spend to do that. But at the same time, it's out of the way. So the $200 stockpile that I had budgeted for December is in a way already consumed. So I'm going to have to reallocate that into other categories that I would have spent on here. So most weeks were over budget. I noted that, talked about that earlier. Need a short-term emergency fund. I'll talk about that later. And then for Christmas spending, I think next year, if I'm in the same position where I still have a lot of gifts to buy when November starts, I really need to plan better. So I left that note for myself so that next year, when I'm doing my November 2025 budget and I'm looking at what happened last year or this year, I will have that handy. Now, this sticky note, I am moving into my December cash flow tracker. And the reason is because this was a deposit that I had forgotten to record. And it was $205 that came out of my Letterbucks. And when I tried to reconcile my cash flow tracker, it didn't balance, and it was off by $205. And I had to go look and find the transaction. And I found the deposit and realized that I had forgotten to note it here. And I also hadn't transferred it into my savings account. So I still haven't transferred it into my savings account, which is why I carried the note over into December so that I remember to do that. But I also wanted to make sure that I had it there on the page to reflect why the deposit was there, because it was just a cash deposit. And there's, if I hadn't made that note, then I would have probably forgotten what it was about if I ever looked back at that in the future. But now I've got it, and I will remember to do that for this month. So now what I'm doing is I'm adding up all of the transactions, all of the inflows and outflows from my checking account. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the beginning balance at the start of the month, and I'm going to add that to all of the deposits that came in. And once I get that total, and I'm not going to write this down, but I'm just going to get the total, and then I'm going to subtract the amount of outflows, so everything that I spent out of my checking account, and that gives me $4,414.95, which was the balance in my checking account at the end of the month. So that balanced. So that is it for the November budget, for the end of the month review. And what we're going to do next is we're going to move on and stuff the Letterbucks. I have some extras that I had from this week that, I spent money today, and I'll just bring those over. So here we are with the Letterbucks challenge. And what this is when I spend cash every week, I save any $1 bills that I get back as change. And I put them in this pouch, and then I take them out at the end of the month, and I allocate them to different smaller sinking funds or much longer term sinking funds. And the way that I decide which bucks go where is each one has a letter on it corresponding to a different branch of the Federal Reserve bank system. And there are 12 in total, and the letters are A through L. A is Boston, B is New York, C is Philadelphia. I get confused on some of the others. G is Chicago, J is Kansas City, K is Dallas, L is San Francisco. Anyway, so each one of those, I get various numbers of them throughout the month. H's and I's are pretty rare. H's, I think, are Minneapolis, and I's are St. Louis, or maybe it's the other way around. Either way, those Federal Reserve banks cover some fairly sparsely populated states, and I'm all the way on the West Coast, so I just don't see those very often. So now what I'm doing is I'm taking out my trackers and all of the cash that I have accumulated for those various letters so far. So you can see I've got a placeholder in here, a couple placeholders in here with the A's. So those placeholders are worth $15 each, and then I have a couple of singletons. Normally, I have been updating my trackers off camera, but this time I decided to do it on camera just because I've been delinquent in doing it. So here I added only one A buck, but I was already one behind. So I filled in both of those spots. And then, of course, you got to shake it to dry it when it's a Sharpie on a glossy piece of paper, and then put it back into the envelope. So now onto the B bucks. B again is New York. And so each one of these letters on here, I use a font that is similar to what you would find on cash. And each one has 15 spaces in it, essentially. So each letter can be up to $15, or you can do $25 for the whole card. So on bills that I see more commonly, or that are going toward longer term or larger sinking funds, I tend to do one per line. Now, I might change this with the A's and the B's just because I don't see them really all that often, but I was getting a rash of both of them. So I thought, okay, well, I better make sure that I've got enough space here and that I'm not filling them up too fast. You can also see down at the bottom, I've written on the B tracker birthday. So each tracker corresponds to something that starts with that letter. And you don't, of course, have to do it that way, but that's what I chose to do. And here we've got C. C is for candy. I go get my hair cut on one of the islands here in the Puget Sound region, and there's a really great candy shop near where I get my hair cut. And so I decide to treat myself when I've got $25 saved up. They have great fudge, they have great fruity candy, and I'm not really much of a candy person or a sweets person, but for this one, I just kind of make a day of it. And so I'm marking off the 3 C's here. And this is one that, although C's aren't that rare, C again is Philadelphia, I don't necessarily want to accumulate hundreds of dollars worth of C-Bucks. When I've got 25, that is more than enough for a treat for myself when I go and get my hair cut. So I just do $1 equals one letter on these. So I'm filling in the whole letter for each dollar that I save. I really do need a haircut in December. I didn't budget for it. So we'll have to see if I have enough money in the C fund to get me some candy by the time that I decide I can't stand it anymore and it's time to make an appointment to get my hair cut. But I'm hoping I can hold out till January. We'll see. I don't know. It's looking dicey. So putting the money back in, putting the tracker back in, And then we're on to the D-Bucks. And D is for dog treats. Now, at my office, because I do have a 9 to 5 job, one of my coworkers brings in her dog periodically, and I don't have a dog at home, but I'd like to have a few treats on hand for her when she comes by. So I I think I had 4 of them this month. And this is another one where these aren't super rare, but I don't want to accumulate too many of them. So, especially with the way that she consumes her treats. So here what I'm doing now is I'm counting up all the D-Bucks, and I am going to swap those with a placeholder. First, I'm going to update the tracker and fill in 4 Ds. Oh, no, I was behind. So I actually need to fill in, it looks like 8 Ds. And I will go in and do the rest of them off camera, but I'm going to fill in the farthest one. So I will come back and fill in the rest later, just because it would be really tedious to watch me do all 8 of those. I am terrible at coloring. It's not that I don't enjoy it, it's just that I don't have the fine motor control required to stay in the lines. So you'll see a lot of my letters here. There are some stray marks outside the lines, and that doesn't bother me too much. There was a time in my life when it would have, but now I just kind of roll with it. So now what I'm doing is I'm going through the pile and making sure that I save the best of the D-Bucks and take all the junky, old, wrinkled, gross ones back to the bank. So I'm counting out 15, and I will swap those with a placeholder. The trackers and the placeholders are both available in my Etsy shop. You certainly don't have to mark or stamp which letter is for the placeholder, but I do. It's just, I don't know, I find it relaxing, fun, what have you. I didn't get enough ink on the stamp, so I got kind of half of the X, and I thought, well, to heck with it. It's close enough, and it'll do the job. So in goes the placeholder, along with, got to shake it off, got to make it dry, along with the remaining $4, and that will go back in the envelope. I think this is the one I struggled with. No, I got it in there. There's one of these that I had the toughest time getting the tracker and the money back in the envelope. So here we are with the e-bucks. I didn't have any e-bucks this week, but I decided that I would go through and just make sure that the tracker was accurate. I didn't put any sort quick on my hands, so it's kind of, I found an extra one. So I need to color in another E. So even though I'm not adding a new one, I am just updating the tracker. And here I found one that had either started to rub off or that I didn't fill in all the way on the time before. So filling in this E. E's are probably my least favorite to fill in, just because they've got all of these extra serifed arms on them. But eventually, it all gets there. So E's are for education. So books, things like that. I mean, I buy books periodically, but it's more for audiobooks or a Kindle book or something like that. Just as something nice to treat myself with when I save up 25 of them. So yeah, E's were the struggle. Okay, so now F's is the last one in this binder. I had to separate them into 2 just because otherwise they wouldn't all fit in one binder. So counting out the F's, looks like I had 3 of them. And so that tracker was up to date because I had a placeholder for 15 and 2 more, and that's what was filled in. So now I just need to add a couple more, 3 more in here for the 3 that I added, and then that will be up to date. F is for festivities. That could be for a birthday party for somebody else. It could be for, just an uplifting treat to do for somebody, a baby shower, a stag party, who knows, anything. Just to have a little bit of extra money on hand so that if somebody is throwing a party or if I am going to a potluck or what have you, then I've got money in there to take care of it. So F's are not the most common, not the most uncommon, but again, I just don't want to accumulate too much of them. So filling in 1 full letter for $1 is fine for this one. Yep, got to dry off the F. Put it back in, and then I'll switch binders. These envelopes I made with my Cricut. I don't sell them in my Etsy shop just because of the amount of weeding that was required with those letters, because those Cricut letters are the same ones, the same font that I used for the trackers. and weeding those was a real pain in the butt. I've always said if somebody wanted them bad enough, I would go through and make them for them, but it would take a long time and it would be really painful, but I would do it. So G-Bucks, I've got two $15 trackers plus four singles, and I'm looking to see if that's correct or not. It's a little hard to tell with the G's just because of the geometry of the letter, but I finally decided that yes, I had marked off 15 twice, which was a full letter, and then four. No H's and no I's. I've got four of each. They just are not common here. We just don't see them. J's are also pretty rare, although I had a few of them this week. And a long time ago, before I got the placeholders, I had put in placeholder cash here. And so most of those have come out. In fact, this is the last one I have left. I still have that $10 bill. And I've been waiting to accumulate 15 so I can swap it with one of my regular placeholders. But I think I may be waiting a while longer on that. I was shocked to get two J's this week, and who knows when I'll see the next one. So J's are for journals. I don't buy journals all that often, but when I do, I buy high quality. I buy a lot of notebooks, but those are more for jotting down ideas and to-dos and things like that. So not the highest quality, whereas a journal, I would buy something that is really nice quality. And so saving up for those. And it's slow going, so it's going to be a while before I get myself a nice journal, but that's okay. I've got plenty of notebooks and journals as it is. So, and of course, at this point, I realize that I have used the blue Sharpie when it should have been the purple Sharpie, but oh well. They're close enough that it's not going to make that much of a difference, and I'm just going to put everything away and move on. So next is K, and I would say in general, K is the second most common, L being the most. This envelope got kind of messed up. I'm not sure why there was the placeholder and some of the money in front of the tracker, but that's okay. So 15, and then I'm counting out the rest of it here. And it looks like with the money that I'm going to add this week, because I had 2 more K-Bucks, that I have enough for a $25 placeholder. Now, unfortunately, I don't have any 25 placeholders in the binder or in the other binder, and I checked both, so now I've got to go look for one. And I had one kind of within reach, so I pulled it out. We're going to stamp it again, and I'm going to tell you I made the same mistake because I didn't remember that I didn't have enough ink on there. So, yeah. So there's the half X on the K, and that's just fine. So I'm going to take the $15 out. I'm going to take those ones out, and I'm going to count them again just to make sure that I'm only taking 10. And if there's any extras, then I will put one of them, and there was, so I'll put one of them back in. So I actually have 26 in K-Bucks. Now, because Ks are common for me, then I don't mark off one letter per dollar. It is one line per dollar. So I now need to get this caught up. And I apologize for all the reflection there on those trackers. They are glossy stock paper, so they are quite reflective of my ring light, and I have my ring light all the way up. So marking off the Ks. Looks like I was behind by maybe a couple of dollars. Okay, now the tracker, got to get it dry, and we'll put it in with the money in the right spot this time. K is for Kismet. That is for when you're just out on the town or running errands or whatever, and you're not particularly looking for anything, but you find something that you absolutely have to have. That's what my Kismet fund is for. So now the L's, and the L's are the furthest along, but they also have the biggest goal behind them. So my L-Bucks I'm saving up for a leather jacket, and I anticipate this jacket is probably going to cost north of $1,000. So I need to fill up at least 2 of these and probably almost 3 of them before I can get my leather jacket. And each one of these is $15 per letter times 25. So that's $250, $325, I think, per full tracker. So yeah, I will need 3 full trackers plus 1 more, and I've only got, well, I'm working on my 5th letter on my first tracker, so it's slow going. But I've got 3 $25 placeholders in here, and then I think I've got 8 more, so for a total of 83. Yep, that's what it looks like. So now all of my trackers are up to date. and all of the money is straight, and I've got the money that can go back to the bank pulled out. And so I will deposit that into I'll deposit in my checking account, transfer into my savings account. I use Wealthfront for my savings, and that is for my emergency fund as well as for these sinking funds, just because it's the easiest for me, and I get a pretty good rate. Currently, I'm at 4.25%. I was at 5%, but of course, as the Fed starts cutting rates, the interest on that account started to go down. So what I'm doing now is I'm just looking for a sticky note, and I'd forgotten where I put them, so it took me a minute to find where they were. Now I'll pull one off. And then I am going to note that I am going to take 15 K bucks and 10 D bucks back to the bank, because the great thing about Wealthfront is it allows you to have different buckets within your savings account. So you can designate your money for different things. So in this case, I'm writing down, like I say, oh, sorry, it was 15 D bucks and 10 K bucks. And I just wanted to double check and count those Ks again to make sure there was really 10 of them. So 10 K bucks, 15 D bucks, those will go back to the bank probably tomorrow, and then, which would be Saturday for me. And then I'll put that placeholder away, and then we will wrap it all up coming up shortly. So that's November done and dusted. If I had to give myself a grade for this month, I'd rate myself at about a B minus. I did go over budget, sometimes due to spending, but I also think that with inflation being what it is, I may need to increase my weekly allowance. I also had an emergency in November, and even though I have an emergency fund, I wasn't really prepared to handle a short term event. I think of an emergency fund as something like a medical scare or a job loss or a divorce, even though I'm a bachelor, but something that is life altering, not a mini emergency that lasts only a few days and then life goes on pretty much as it had before. In reality, I could have made a claim on my renter's insurance since I'm protected for events like this, but for such a small amount after my deductible, it just didn't seem worth it. So I think one of my goals after I get my emergency fund fully funded will be to have a self insurance fund, just a small amount of money set aside to catch all the little emergencies, not just the big life altering ones. Something to think about for 2025, which is why I noted it here. I want to thank you for spending some time with me today, and a special thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button, subscribe if you're new, leave a comment down below, and share with your friends. If you're interested in any of the Ready Budget Go products that I used in today's video, a link to my Etsy shop is down in the description. Until I see you again next time, take care.